Welcome, everybody. It is great to have you join us for this really special hour with Jane Fonda, our activist, author, actor, and dear friend. What a special opportunity. Jane, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for hosting, Annie.
If you are watching on Facebook, please introduce yourself on Facebook. We'd love to see who's here with us today. We already had over 500 people buy the book and send in questions. So what we're going to do is Jane is going to be signing books. We're going to ask her to share a bit about the book, what the book is about, why she wrote it, and then we're going to turn it over to the audience questions that we have already gotten and that are continuing to come in today.
That's cool. Well,
Jane, I'm going to dive in.
As you may know, for about 4 months last fall and winter, I carried out weekly actions with Greenpeace called Fire Drill Fridays in Washington, D.C. And we didn't know if it was going to work, if we gained traction. It was pretty small in the beginning, but it's started to grow. People started coming from all over the country and then coming back again and again. And so in November, Annie and I, and they were asking, weren't they, Annie, can we do Fire Drill Fridays where we live? All over the country, people were asking. And so we realized that I needed to write a book about it because it was a fascinating experience. I had never done anything like this. I learned so much, and I wanted to write about, what led me to do it and then what the experience was doing it. And every week we focused on a different part of the climate crisis, how climate affects oceans and forests and women and the military and jobs and so forth. And at the end of each chapter, Annie wrote, "What can I do?" Very user-friendly, very clear, wonderful people. I think it's people's favorite parts besides the pictures. Pictures are so great. What you can see looking at the pictures is what fun we had. It was centered in joy and love the entire time. It was just a fabulous experience. So that's why I wrote it. I love it so much. Mine is all underlined and dog-eared. It's really useful. So let's have our first person. Who shall I sign the first book to?
Amanda Gerry, Gerry. Amanda Gerry. Just your name, Jane.
Hi, Amanda. Thank you very much for buying the book.
Amanda is from Lake George, New York. And Amanda's question is, do you feel as inspired today to speak up as when you first started?
Oh, way more, way more. First of all, the climate crisis is the existential crisis. I mean, if we can't do what's needed, what the scientists tell us we have to do, which is to phase ourselves out of fossil fuel. We have to cut our fossil fuel emissions in half by 2030. That's 10 years. I mean, it's a huge thing to have to undertake, but that has to happen. We cannot allow the climate to warm more. Every ½ degree of warming, millions more people will die and species will disappear. So I have never wanted to commit my entire self, every ounce of who I am, to a cause like this, because it will determine whether there is a livable future.
Right. I often say we have to fight with everything we have because what is at stake is everything that we love. And that is not hyperbole. I mean, we are only at 1 degree temperature rise now. And look at our state of California. We are literally in flames. So important. While you're signing, just your name, sign, not the purchaser's name. I want to remind folks that they can get signed copies of the book if you haven't yet at premiercollectibles.com/Jane, and that's also in the comment section. And if you want to get involved with climate activism, with Jane, with Fire Drill Fridays, and with Greenpeace, we're all doing this together. Please join us. You can join us by texting the word Jane to 877, just to that number, 877, text Jane, or you can sign up at firedrillfridays.com/volunteer, and that's also in the chat box. And we would love to have you join us with our work every Friday and every day. All right, we
have tens of thousands of volunteers that keep writing me and telling me how they're really enjoying volunteering with Fire Drill Friday and Greenpeace. It makes them feel good, keeps them from being depressed. Who is the second person?
We have Helen Sanchez in Pennington, New Jersey. And Helen asks, What is the one thing we can start with to support climate leaders after we read your book?
Annie, what do you think?
I think reading the book is an excellent start, and it is full of so many ideas. But the main thing is to get involved with other people. We can do so much more if we work together. If we're just one person and we try to perfect our shopping, perfect our lifestyles, that's all important, but that's not the way you scale impact, is join with others to have bigger scalable impact.
And that's why Annie gave you the way that you can sign up with Fire Drill Fridays and Greenpeace. That's the way to do it. Thank you so much, Helen.
And one of the areas we need to have impact is getting the next president, whoever that is, but getting the next president to act on climate. And so Jeremy Terry in New York asks us, do you think a Biden presidency will follow through on the Green New Deal? And I'll add, and what can we do to ensure that he does?
Well, thank you, Jeremy. Annie gave me a metaphor that I absolutely love about what we did when Obama was elected. You know, when Obama was campaigning for the presidency, we were right there. You know, it was a movement. He built a movement and we were all involved. And suddenly he got elected, it became a movie. Oh, look what he's doing. Oh no, what's going to happen next? We became passive observers. Wrong. We can't do that this time. We shouldn't have done it last time. Can't do it this time. We have to work real hard to get the Democrat. I don't know how much I can say on this channel right now.
You can say whatever you want.
We have to get Biden elected. And then the minute he's elected, we have to roll up our sleeves and join together in unprecedented numbers to force him to support the Green New Deal and to phase us out of fossil fuels. I don't know if he's going to do it left to his own devices, probably not, but we have to make him do it. Our future depends on it. Thanks, Jeremy. Next question.
Liz Jameson in Tallahassee, Florida asks.
Liz? L-I-Z?
Liz, L-I-Z. Liz Jameson in Tallahassee, Florida asks, do you agree that we only have 10 years to turn this ship around? What's that 10-year deadline about?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. The scientists tell us, and I tell you something, if the COVID pandemic has taught us nothing else, it should have taught us that we have to listen to the experts, the medical experts and the scientists. And the scientists are telling us that we have until 2030 maximum, maybe not even that much, to reduce our fossil fuel emissions in half. That means no new permits can be signed. It means we have to stop any new fossil fuel infrastructure and begin to phase out what's already existing. And that includes fracking. That's what they mean by cut our emissions in half in 30 years. Is there more that can be said there, Annie?
Cut our emissions in half in 10 years by 2030. Cut our emissions half in 10 years and then keep going. And that combination of the Green New Deal and reducing fossil fuels, that combination is how we're going to turn things around. So one thing folks can do is go to candidates events and raise your hand and ask, do you support a Green New Deal? And do you support reducing fossil fuels? And if they don't say yes, tell them they need to earn your vote. They don't just automatically get to assume their vote. And then once they get an election, once they get elected, remind them that they're working for us and demand that they deliver on both of those things.
And don't support a candidate that is taking money from the fossil fuel industry.
Right.
Okay.
There's a whole section about that in the book, and the No Fossil Fuel Money Pledge. There's a wonderful movement getting candidates to agree not to take fossil fuel money, because if they take fossil fuel money, they are beholden to those corporations when they get in office. And we want them beholden to people and the planet and the science. All right, we've got Isabel Massey from Sherbrooke, Quebec, who I think is ready to protest because she asks, what happens when you get arrested? Any tips on what to say to the judge when you get arrested at a protest?
Isabel is I-S-A-B-E-L or E-L-L-E?
But you're just supposed to be writing your name, Jane. These are just generic signings that we'll send out.
I'm signing their first names.
Okay.
Thank you for that question. I'm glad that you're thinking about this, because Civil disobedience and getting arrested needs to become the new normal, because civil disobedience is what history has shown works. It works. We've tried everything else. We've done all the things that democracy has allowed us to do, petitioning and lobbying and protesting, marching, and we haven't been heard sufficiently. So we have to take the next step and put our bodies on the line. I never actually faced a judge. So Annie, maybe what do you say to a judge?
Usually you don't actually see a judge. Usually you can tell what happened with you, but the judge is much later. There have been a couple of great cases recently where somebody engaging in civil disobedience to protect the climate did make it to a judge, and the judge threw it out and said that person was acting in self-defense, that person was doing what was morally compelling. So some activists actually try to make it to the judge to get more precedent of using the necessity defense of letting people who engage in civil disobedience off the hook, but that's very rare. Usually you don't even come near a judge. I mean, tell what happened, Jane, when you got arrested. What about on your birthday? That was the best arrest, because we had hundreds of people joining in to celebrate your birthday by putting their bodies on the line for the planet.
Oh, it was a fantastic experience. I wanted to actually be put in jail because I thought it would get even more attention to turn 82 in jail. They should have, because it was my 5th arrest, but they didn't do it, maybe because they knew that it would get a lot of press coverage. So they didn't put me in jail. When I did spend a night in jail while I was in DC with Fire Drill Fridays, the judge no-papered me, which meant the charges were dismissed with a warning that if I did it again, I would have to go before a judge and maybe spend 3 months in jail. But they didn't do it. But that's just, that's not necessarily the way it usually goes. What were you going to say, Annie?
I was going to say that the book actually has some guidance in it about principles for taking nonviolent direct action. Greenpeace, as many people may know, was actually born in an act of nonviolent direct action or civil disobedience, and we believe it is absolutely an essential tool available to us in a democracy. And in the book is a list of principles that we recommend people follow if they do want to engage in civil disobedience. Things like absolutely no violence, which we include to mean no property damage. So we never damage property. You treat people with respect, including the law enforcement officials that are taking you in. There's a whole bunch of advice there. So you can read that in the book that you got. But it is a really powerful thing. And another thing that works is if a lot of people do it. Jane, one reason they may not have put you in jail on your 82nd birthday is there probably wasn't a jail big enough. When we have that many hundreds and hundreds of people peacefully, respectfully, informed by the science and our values, engaging in civil disobedience, it forces change in the context around us.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill.
Ann Wilcox in Washington, D.C. Oh, I hope you came to some of our Fire Drill Fridays there. Asks if you could talk about the value of intergenerational organizing, about bringing age and youth together in action.
That's what the youth were asking for, that last year when millions and millions of young people all over the world were engaging in the largest demonstrations the world has ever seen. And they were saying, it's our future we're fighting for. We didn't cause this to happen. Where are the adults that will join us? And so part of my motivation going to DC was, I'm here, I'll stand with you. I'm an adult. It's important that it be intergenerational. We have to listen to the young people. They have so much more at stake. I was really struck during the rallies in Washington with the young people, how much grief they're carrying, grief about what's been lost, grief about what they know will continue to be lost, uncertainty about whether they should even continue with their studies and consider having a career because they just don't know if there's going to be a future. I mean, think about that. That is so heartbreaking. So it's important that older people stand with young people and give them the platform, allow their voices to be heard, but stand with them in solidarity. I was very proud to do that. Thank you, Anne.
Like the young people, the stakes are so high for them that they are really prioritizing this at the level it needs to be prioritized. And they have shifted the discourse and opened up political openings at a level that we haven't seen in decades. So we owe an enormous gratitude and all the support that we can give to the young climate leaders. All right, a number of people wrote in on the same question. Darlene Hanatsishin in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Mark Iaconetti in Honolulu, Julia Krasnick in Klagenfurt, I think that's in Germany, and Alexandria Anderschurch in Berlin all wrote the same question, which is about who and what has inspired you over the years? How do you keep inspired? What keeps you going? How do you motivate yourself?
Wow. I think one of the things is that over the 60 years that I've been an activist, I have witnessed people change profoundly. Shy housewives that were nervous about speaking in public become true warriors when their children's safety and well-being was at stake and their community's safety and well-being was at stake. Knowing how profoundly people can change and evolve is one of the things that keeps me going. I want to keep encouraging that. And I guess another thing is that I spent 30 years of my life not being an activist, and I was miserable. I didn't know it was because I hadn't done anything worthwhile. I had never stood up for something that I believed in. I didn't even know what I believed in. Having experienced life without activism and how empty that felt to me, I will never go back. I mean, people say, well, you're old, why don't you retire? I mean, I couldn't live with myself. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night now with these plural crises that are hanging over our heads. Most importantly, the climate crisis, because everything else will be affected by that. I can't pretend that that doesn't exist. It impacts every part of my life. And so knowing that and seeing the wonderful things that so many people, especially young people, are doing, here's another thing. When I became an activist, I started meeting people like Annie. I mean, nobody's like Annie, but people who are brilliant, who could have been, they could have been really rich and running big corporations, but they weren't. They'd committed their lives in alignment with their values to make a difference in the world. I had never met people like this before. And that was what affected me the most profoundly. And so I want to be like them. That's what keeps me going. So how many people were there that I have to sign books to? You went through these names so fast.
Just sign your own name, and the Premier Collectibles will distribute them.
Okay.
And remind folks that you can get a copy of a book if you haven't already at premiercollectibles.com/Jane. And the other important website to remember, if you want to get involved in climate activism with Jane and Greenpeace and Fire Drill Fridays, you can text Jane to 877-877, or you can sign up at firedrillfridays.com/volunteer. And what you just said about activism being such a great way to enrich your life is so important. People often say to me, isn't it hard trying to change our entire energy system to run on clean energy? Isn't it hard trying to change the world? I say, yeah, but it would be intolerable not trying. That would be really hard. We have some other really good questions that came in. This is a fun one from Megan Drover. She said, what's one word you would use to describe the atmosphere at a Fire Drill Friday protest?
Happiness. People seemed so happy. You can see it in the photographs in the book. I love the photos in this book. People were happy, even though what we were talking about and what we were fighting for is so, can make you very sad and very scared. But because we were joined together in community to fight for what we knew was right, there was happiness and joy. I would when I'd be arrested and they'd put the handcuffs on me, and I'd look around at the other people having handcuffs put on, and I could see they felt like I did. I'm stepping into my power. Even though
Right.
I'm losing all control, I'm becoming powerful. And that's a joyful feeling.
It is. And because so many people are asking themselves every single day, the title of this book is What Can I Do? You know, Jane and I both live in California, which is on fire. I mean, there's smoke in the air. And every day we all wake up and say, what can I do? And this book is full of good ideas. Here's another question from Karen. Karen says, my grown kids worry about my grown kids worry about climate change. Do your kids worry, and what do you tell them?
My kids do worry. My kids and my grandkids came to DC and engaged with us. They committed civil disobedience and were arrested with me. They care a lot. What was the last part of that question?
What do you tell your kids and your grandkids when they worry? You know, I find it hard. My kid worries, and as a mom, I want to say it's all going to be okay, honey. And this is the first issue that I hesitate to say that because we don't know yet.
We don't know. I think I try to, it's I think less what you say to your children as what you do that they can see that has an impact on them. So I'm trying to show them through my actions that it is actions that matter, whether it's writing a letter to a senator, whether it's voting, whether it's calling up your representative, whether it's going to a march and protest or getting arrested. It's your actions that matter, and it's your actions that make you feel better.
Right.
Because if you just sit and worry, you're going to get very depressed. But if you start doing something about it, the depression disappears. That's why I one of the reasons that I went to Washington, I was so depressed because I didn't feel I was doing enough. But then Greta said, get out of your comfort zone. She didn't say it to me. I wish she'd said it to me. I've never met Greta Thunberg, but I read that she said, we have to get out of our comfort zones. And that's why I went to DC.
Do you want to just share a little of that story about you coming to DC? Because that's a pretty big thing to just uproot your life and leave your beloved dog at home and say, I'm moving to DC to protest climate change. That's
It was a year ago, Labor Day. I write about this in the first chapter of the book. And I like I said, I was depressed. I read Naomi Klein's book called On Fire, A Burning Case for the Green New Deal. And the way she wrote about the science, I hadn't really paid enough attention to the science and how little time we had left. That really struck me. 2030 is when we have to reduce our fossil fuel emissions in half. And then what she wrote about Greta Thunberg, that we have to get out of our climate, out of our comfort zones. And so I thought, I know what I'm going to do. And of course, Annie was the first person I called, because is there a braver organization than Greenpeace? And she runs Greenpeace. So I called Annie and I said, Annie, I want to move to DC and camp out in front of the White House for a year. And there was this long silence. And then she said, well, Jane, that's great, but it's illegal. You can't do that anymore. But let's try to figure out what you can do, since you want to put yourself on the line, which is really great. So we had a conference call with Naomi Klein, the author of the book that had so inspired me, and Bill McKibben and Annie. And we decided every Friday, if the young climate strikers who were already having their actions on Friday would welcome my joining them, then it would be every Friday, and we would include civil disobedience. And that's where the idea came up. So I moved to DC, and the rest is history.
And that history is written in this book. Boy, I have to say the questions coming in are so good. I have two really important ones here. One is from Catherine Cox in Santa Barbara, not far from you. Catherine says, I am a third-year law student and 51 years old. Do you have any words of support for women who believe it is never too late to make a difference and help the world?
Well, I mean, I couldn't agree more. It is never too late to make a difference. And what greater thing could one want than to go out have your last breath be about trying to make a difference. I mean, I'm all committed to that. That's what I want to do. I want to be active until the moment that I can take my last breath.
And talk a little bit about the role of women. It was really interesting at our weekly Fire Drill Fridays. I've been organizing protests for 30 years. I have never seen a crowd that was so consistently women, so consistently older women. Oh, we can't see you anymore. And such fearless women. Talk about a little bit about the role of women, and especially older women at Fire Drill Fridays, and why you think that is.
Well, first of all, older women tend to get braver. I mean, science has shown that that's true. A lot of that is hormonal. Um, our testosterone is more front and center than our estrogen as we get older. So we're pretty feisty as we're older. And also, what the heck do we have to lose, right? Been there, done that with just about everything else. So what have we got to lose? Let's really put ourselves on the line. But also, women are less vulnerable to the disease of individualism. And that is both part of social conditioning, but it's also evolutionary, I think. We have always, since way back in the hunter-gatherer days, we have found our strength collectively, sitting in circles around campfires, sharing remedies and telling it where the dangers lie and where we go to get the best food and the safest water, and helping each other with our children. And that became sewing bees, and then quilting bees, and book clubs now. Women hang together to solve problems and confront dangers. Men are much more solitary. Our collectivism is our superpower. So it didn't surprise me that it was mostly women that came to Fire Drill Fridays. I
really loved it. The energy was so, I mean, everybody's welcome, but I have to say, such a predominantly woman protest was really fun. Can't wait till we can do it again. All right, here's a very serious question from Denise in Marietta, Georgia. And this is an issue that we have discussed at length. Denise says, what do you tell the families who count on coal jobs to feed their families? We must let the workers know that they matter too.
Oh boy, that is got to be front and center. What we do, I mean, let me use Germany as an example. Germany has been reliant always historically on coal. In Germany, the government made a commitment to phase out of coal power. And so they have already transitioned over 20,000 coal workers out of coal into a green and sustainable energy sector and other jobs. They could do this because the unions were at the table, the workers, the communities, environmentalists, the government, everybody was together figuring out how to do it. Obviously, you're not going to make it work if the unions are opposed to it. And the unions will be opposed to it if their $100,000 a year jobs are asked to move to $40,000 a year jobs. Because unfortunately, as of now, the green sector is not unionized sufficiently. So we have to be sure that in the transition off fossil fuel, that fossil fuel workers and communities that depend on fossil fuels are trained and paid while they're being trained, and then transition to other jobs, ideally where they live so they don't have to move, and protected by unions and are allowed collective bargaining and things like that. We can't just screw the workers and move into a green economy. That's what the Green New Deal, why the Green New Deal is so important, because it puts justice and just transitions front and center. Everywhere in the world where the transitioning to a green economy has worked is because the workers and the unions were involved in the decisions and in the process.
Right, that is such an important issue. I'm so glad that you raised it. No one is talking about we have to get off fossil fuels tomorrow. No one's saying we have to stop immediately. What we're calling for is a just transition, or some people call it a responsible and managed decline. Let's start reducing it down, winding it down, which is inevitable. We're going to have to do it anyway. And so either we plan ahead and we do it in a way that safeguards the fossil fuel dependent workers and communities, or we don't, and then it's going to just come crashing down. So it really is in the workers' best interest, in all of our best interest, to figure out how to do it together. And the question that always comes up is, who's going to pay for that? Where's the money? But look how much money we are paying for these extreme weather events, for redoing our infrastructure to be climate resilient. I mean, I can't even think of the cost of this fire right now in California. We could use all that money instead to be proactively avoiding this kind of disaster in the future in a way that cares for those workers, just as you explained. All right, here's a very different question from David Kakowski in Macedonia, Ohio. What was the first band that you saw in your first concert ever? Very different question. Do you remember your first concert ever?
It was in a see, these were back in the days, in the late 50s. It was a coffee house and it was Shelly Manne.
Oh, you remember, that's great. I don't know,
Yeah.
Shelly Manne. All right, here's another question that I think a lot of us grapple with. For those of us living in red states, or I'll just add having stubborn uncles or neighbors that are deep into climate change denial, how do we start a conversation with them? What steps can we do to bring about change in these areas that just don't understand the science?
Well, I think it's important to talk about it. We have to talk about it, because if we don't talk about the climate crisis, we can't care. And if we can't care, we can't act. And so let's just say it is your uncle at a family gathering who is a climate denier. Try to think of or find out from him, kind of by listening, what it is he cares about. Does he care about his grandkids and their future? Maybe he's a birder. Maybe he cares about the fact that there are almost 3 million fewer birds in North America than there were in 1970. Maybe he cares about the oceans. Whatever he cares about, try to gear your discussion of the climate crisis in that direction, so he'll see how the things he cares about will be damaged and endangered by an increasing climate crisis. Do you have anything to add, Annie?
I think that all of that is important. Find the common ground. You know, organizers often say, seek first to understand before you seek to be understood. You know, find out what is important to that person and find those common grounds. I also think that blame and shame, you know, shame on you for having an SUV or whatever it is, that is just super effective. The problem that we're facing is not one of individual choices, but it's a systemic problem, and we shouldn't be blaming people that are trapped in the system and just trying to get by. One of the things I love about this book, Jane, is that each of the issues you talk about, climate and war, climate and water, the way that you share information is so non-judgmental. It's so inviting. You're much more of a, look what I just learned. Isn't this interesting? Come join me approach, rather than shame on you for driving a car. I find it a really great model of how to talk about these issues in a non-judgmental and inviting way. So hopefully the book will get you some more ideas of how to talk to your uncle and your neighbors in a red state. There's so many questions here. This one, there's a bunch of that are similar to this, is you've championed so many urgent causes over the course of your life, and there are so many urgent causes right now. Why climate? Why did you decide to focus on climate?
Because if we don't do what the scientists are telling us we need to do in time, everything else will be washed away. You know, whether it's financial security, whether it's I mean, there is food, water, everything about our lives will be shaken up and damaged. It affects everything, national security, economic security, physical security. I mean, it's the overarching issue that affects everything else, and that it's not the only issue. No, the climate crisis is there, and so is the empathy crisis and the injustice crisis. But if we don't solve the climate crisis, the others will just get a lot worse until they overwhelm us.
Right. And if we do it right, if we do solve the climate crisis, we can address so many of these other things at the same time, because we can solve the climate crisis in a way that enhances good union jobs by redoing our infrastructure, that enhances equity and justice by addressing disproportionate pollution. I mean, there's so many ways that we can solve multiple crises at once.
We've been fighting, for the COVID relief monies, these trillions of dollars that suddenly the government could come up with when there's an emergency. Now we know they can do that. So they can't say anymore, well, the Green New Deal is too expensive. No, when there's an emergency, the government can come up with money. And we've been saying, use this to solve both crises at once. Use the money to put people to work in the clean, renewable energy sector and retrofitting buildings and building charging stations and a smart grid. And there's so much that needs to be done in this country to make us more resilient in the face of the climate crisis. And it's very job intensive. That's where people need to be put to work.
And there's another related question is, what have you done in your own personal life to reduce your carbon footprint, even while realizing that individual action's not enough? What kind of things have you done in your own life?
I've found ways to replace the single-use plastics that I was using. And, they're kind of fun, whether it's things made of sugar cane, things made of hemp, things eating meat. And I've also changed the way I eat fish. And that was a big surprise to me that I learned, that I write about in the book. I thought, well, meat is one thing. I understand why we need to cut out meat, but fish? But I've discovered there are parts of the world where, there's billions of people who they don't have a choice. Fish is all they have to eat. And fish are being depleted, and some are even going extinct. So those of us who do have a choice have to leave the fish aside, so the people who have no choice will have something to eat. That's one thing. Another thing is the big fish, the billed fish, the swordfish and the king mackerel and sharks and things like that. Their numbers are really seriously depleted, and they have a very long reproductive cycle. So if we kill them and eat them, they may never have been able to reproduce. So, and their numbers are falling. So we have to remember that these things are wild animals. They're a species that are going extinct. We shouldn't think of them like commodities. They're beautiful creatures. They're the last wild creatures that are being hunted for food. We have to stop that and respect them as species, and try to eat things that are more easily replenished.
And there's a bunch of guidance and resources for learning more about seafood and other food in the book. So Michelle from Baltimore, Maryland asked a question I love. When are you coming back to Washington, D.C.?
Annie and I want to come back to DC so much. I can't wait. But I can't answer the question. I don't know. Like a lot of businesses, Grace and Frankie shut down, but we do have to finish our final season, and we're going to go back to work mid-January. Whether or not I'll be able to go back to Washington before then, I don't know. But for sure, when Grace and Frankie is over, we'll be back.
Right. I'd say as soon as it's safe to do so, we will be there. Here's a really interesting question from Christina in Altoona, Pennsylvania. Christina says that you've talked about learning curves, how you've learned about pronouns, how you've learned about environmental issues. What other new things have you been learning about recently that you'd recommend to folks?
Learning about pronouns. Oh, I don't know. I'm doing a lot. I'm reading a wonderful book now called Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, who wrote another wonderful book that I read called The Warmth of Other Suns. In 2016, like a lot of people, I realized what I hadn't realized before, the prevalence of white supremacy, much more prevalent than I had realized. So I very deliberately decided to study racism and slavery and Jim Crow and Reconstruction to really understand much more. So a lot of my learning has been about that, about racial inequity and what we can do about it. And I posted on my website a lot about that. I don't know. My life is about learning. I learn all the time. This book, it's really selfish what I did, because I wanted to learn more about the climate crisis and what I could do. And so this is how I did it. I wrote a book about it based on what I learned in DC. And it's
Right. And one of the things we did with the Fire Drill Fridays in Washington, D.C., and we've continued to do online, is we've combined the protests with different kinds of teach-ins. So in Washington, D.C., we had 14 weeks with a theme of each one, climate and women, climate and militarism, climate and forests. And we'd have the teach-in on Thursday where we would bring in all these experts on the issue to learn about the issue, and then the protest on Friday. And that provided a lot of the content in the book. And we're continuing to do that. And so as Jane learns about new issues, whether it's how our democracy is imperiled or the importance of racial justice being core to our climate justice work, all of this is we invite guests on to come join Jane in conversation, and all of the videos are available on firedrillfridays.com. So I encourage people to look at that incredible educational resources on all different issues that are related to climate.
I've learned a lot about the post office. We had 2 Fire Drill Fridays focusing on the post office. The head of the Postal Workers Union and the chief of staff of the Mail Carriers Union. 360,000 workers, very diverse. All of them are paid a living wage, no matter who they are, man, women, everything. Everybody gets paid the same. It's a good working job. I learned a lot about, I've fallen in love with the post office, basically.
Yeah, those 2 Fire Drill Fridays were so important for people to understand how the post office is such a crucial public service and public agency, and how it is also so important to our democracy, especially as many people can't get to vote in person. Maybe they can't get the day off. Election day should be a national holiday, but also many people don't want to go because of COVID. And so we need to have vote by mail, which they are totally capable of running despite narratives to the opposite. All right, we're changing topic here. Richard in North Carolina is asking, what is the status of the 9 to 5 sequel, and any chance Dolly will appear on Grace and Frankie?
No, I don't think so. We've seen most of the scripts for the final 7th season, and no, Dolly is super busy, and she's got a lot on her plate. Like, she has Dollywood, and they had to lay off a lot of those workers, and I know that she's suffering because of that. And she's trying to do everything she can to help protect the many workers that really, relied on Dollywood. We're also, we tried to get a script for a sequel to 9 to 5, and it just didn't happen, I'm sorry to say.
Oh, that is a classic. I hope everyone has seen it. Back to our Fire Drill Fridays themes. Catherine in Ottawa is asking if you can share some information about the devastating effects of factory farming on climate change, on the environment, and our health. Is that something that Fire Drill Fridays looked into?
Absolutely. We devoted a Friday in DC to food and agriculture and climate. And there's absolutely no question that the way food is grown in the United States now majorly contributes to the climate crisis. It's just horrible to learn about how food is grown. It's unhealthy. We have destroyed the soils. It's big corporations like Monsanto and Cargill and others own the seeds now that have to be replanted every year. The notion of perennials that grow without having to be replanted are out. You're not even allowed to plant perennials. You have to keep buying from these companies to plant the seeds. And it's all being done long distance from, I don't know, Chicago, an office in Chicago, and they're working the machines and doing the planting. And no, we have to get back to people on the land with their hands, planting real food, allowing perennials to grow deep roots that helps replenish the soil. We have to stop with the fossil fuel-based fertilizers that leach and destroy the soil and then leach and run off into water, destroying lakes. Whole parts of oceans have died because of the agricultural runoff, because of the fossil fuel-based fertilizers, for example. Family farms are going broke. This is one of the things that the Green New Deal addresses, getting help to farms so that they can go back to the way they were. And this is real important. My dad came from the Great Plains. He came from Omaha, Nebraska, and the land was always so important to him. And so I always think of him. And also he was in the movie Grapes of Wrath about when, because of factory farming that was already starting in the 30s, that began to destroy the topsoil in places like Oklahoma, the dust storms happened and drove tens of thousands of families off the land, traveling the country, migrants within their own country, searching for jobs. Many of them came to California and went to work in the San Joaquin Valley in Kern County and places like that. In those days, they were white farmers, but they faced terrible working conditions, just as the workers do now, who are primarily Latino and Latina, and are treated so terribly, sprayed with pesticides and working near open pits where fracking and oil is dumped with toxins coming out, and it's terrible how we treat these people that provide us with our food. But this issue of agriculture is really, really critical. And we have to get back to doing things on a human scale, the way food is produced most places in the world.
Right. And so improper agriculture can fuel environmental harm. And on the converse, healthy soils actually can pull carbon out of the atmosphere and actually help combat climate change. So it just shows how these are so interconnected, as well as immigration that's driving those laborers to come to this country is fueled by climate change. And that's a topic that is going to be discussed at this Friday's Fire Drill Friday, where Jane will be joined by immigration expert, wonderful activist, and Greenpeace board member, Saket Soni. That's this Friday at 11 o'clock Pacific. You can see it at Fire Drill Fridays on Facebook. There's so many questions, it's hard to pick because we're gonna run out of time, but let me pick a couple more good ones. Here's one from Donna in New Jersey, said, how different is it protesting and having your voice heard now compared to when you were an activist in the 60s and 70s? What's changed?
I've changed. I went from literally Barbarella to an activist, and I hadn't had much preparation, and it was a very divisive time like now, and very ideological. And so I borrowed other people's narratives and words, and I didn't really, I mean, I knew what I was doing was right, but I hadn't metabolized it into my own self, into my own body. I'm very glad that I did what I did when I did, but you know, there's a maturity that happens when you've been at it a long time. And social media has also changed so much. Instead of, you know, I used to be the one that worked the mimeograph machine making leaflets. So you had to make the leaflets and then you had to pass them out or post them. And it just took a long time to build a demonstration or a protest. It was hard. And now it can happen so quickly and so much easier. And that's all great. So social media is, you know, it has its bad sides, but for an activist, it's very helpful. What else do you think is different, Annie? You've been at it a long time too.
I think that there's more cross-fertilization of activists working on different kinds of issues. I think for a long time, we limited our ability to both understand the problem and to build power by staying in our lane. So some people worked on women's issues, some people worked on workers' rights, some people worked on racial justice, some people worked on saving forests. There's all these different lanes. And as our movement has become more interconnected, and we're understanding the problem at a deeper systemic level, we realize that we're fighting a lot of the same forces, and the solutions to one are solutions to all. And so we're getting more united. And that was one thing I love about Fire Drill Fridays is we had immigrant activists and public health activists and women's activists and anti-war activists, because if we're all part of the same movement, our solutions will be more comprehensive and we will have more power and more people, so we will be more likely to win. So I see a de-siloization that makes me enormously happy.
Intersectionality is the word that's used, invented by Kimberly Crenshaw. Yeah, And you know, the uprisings that happened in the wake of George Floyd's murder, that wouldn't have happened in the 60s and 70s. Such a diverse outpouring, not just a racially diverse, but age and ableness. There were people in wheelchairs and with canes, as well as very young people. It was really amazing. And I think that part of that, well, there were a lot of reasons for it. Part of it was because it's led by women. There was a more inclusiveness to it. There was a joy to it that was more welcoming. People felt safe coming and joining. And that is so important. Just the fact that that happened is so encouraging. So those are some of the things that are different. I think there's more joy, believe it or not, even though things seem so bad, but there's more joy now than there was. And there's much more women in leadership, and I think that's part of the joy. And like Annie said, intersectionality, we're much less siloed than we used to be.
Right, during those movement for Black Lives protests, Greenpeace was out there in force. We had members come out, we had our staff come out. I don't know that would have happened in the 1970s. The coming together as one really is a joyful and powerful thing, which is a perfect lead to this next question. I can't read the name of the person because it isn't written in Korean. So somebody in Korea is asking you, I would like to ask if and how environmental issues connect with racism, misogyny, and other vital issues.
Wow, absolutely. On so many levels. I mean, one level is, and I learned this from Annie, who told me it's a study came out, was it 1987? There was a study that showed that the fossil fuel industry made very deliberate choices to put their infrastructures and their refineries and their incinerators and their Superfund sites that are so polluted that the federal government has to step in, put them in communities of color and low-income communities, feeling that these communities didn't have the power to do anything about it. I mean, they weren't put into Beverly Hills or Bel Air because they thought, well, these people have too much money and too much power and they'll force us out. So that's racism right there. And because of the placement of the fossil fuel infrastructure in these places that came to be called sacrifice zones, imagine communities of color being called sacrifice zones. Because of that, the people who live there become ill, cancer, heart disease, lung diseases, very, very vulnerable then to the pandemics that come along. It's why more of them, it's one of the reasons that more of them are getting sick and dying from the COVID pandemic. So that's one thing. But another thing is the ideology that allows us to rape the earth and kill sentient beings on earth is the same mentality that brought slavery to this country and built the American economy on the backs of slaves, raping and pillaging people that were considered chattel, not even human, is the same mentality that can do what the fossil fuel industry right now is doing to the earth and to all sentient beings on it. And so tackling one means tackling the other, I think. Annie, do you want to add anything?
No, I think you got it all. That's absolutely right. That's also an issue that we have looked at both in the book, it covers it, but also in some of our recent Fire Drill Fridays. So please do check out some of the videos on there, especially I'm thinking of the conversation with Heather McGee, who has just written a book called The Sum of Us, How Racism Hurts Us All. And she explained how the existence of racism has actually made the climate problem worse, because the idea that we could have these sacrifice zones, that we have othered, that some communities, it's okay for them to be polluted, has meant that overall pollution goes up. If we felt that our communities need to be as safe as the communities across town, in other towns across the globe, if we had the same level of expectations of protection and respect to all communities, there would be less pollution overall. So everybody would benefit. So check out our Fire Drill Friday conversation with Heather McGee, as well as some of the others. All right, our final question.
Let me just add one more thing.
Yes.
The Yale project on climate communications has shown that Black people and Latinx care more about climate than white people. So anybody that thinks that the environmental movement, the climate movement is a white movement, they're wrong.
That's absolutely true. And the mainstream media has so disproportionately looked at white experts, especially white men experts, as the voices of experience and expertise on this. And one of the things Fire Drill Fridays did, which you captured so well in the book, is focus on the voices that are so often excluded from the debate. So we have young people, women, indigenous people, people of color, people who are living the front lines of the climate experience and are just as much experts, more so even, than somebody who has a PhD but is not on the front line. So the diversity of voices is just really a beautiful thing in the project and in the book. So our final question, we have 3 minutes left, is how do we get involved?
Text Jane to 877-877 to get involved with Fire Drill Friday and Greenpeace. We have tens of thousands of volunteers that are really doing so much in relationship right now to the election, and then we'll continue on afterwards, and they're enjoying it so much. So become part of this growing community that that is fighting for our future. And then I don't have it written down in front of me what the website is. What is it?
firedrillfridays.com/volunteer. And there are lots of opportunities to volunteer, from just one-off, if you just want to spend an hour, all the way up to 5 hours a week. And right now, as Jane said, we are focusing on reaching out to people that we believe care about climate and making sure that they vote. Make sure that they vote and that they get all their friends to vote, because we know that the majority of people in this country now do care about climate. The majority of people do now want government action. What we need to do is work together to translate that concern into power at the polls, and then once the election is over, to hold the new president and all elected officials accountable. So we would love to have you join us. Text the word Jane to 877-877, or sign up at firedrillfridays.com/volunteer and read the book and join us.
It's full of things to do. It's called What Can I Do? And this answers that question.
It does. Jane, thank you so much for inspiring us all with your activism, for modeling what it means to lead with curiosity and learning, and for telling us all what we can do. It is such
Thank you so much, Annie, and thank you all for joining us and buying the book. I hope we all cross paths again. Thanks.
And